Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of thevikingage.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for the Viking Age, Puckett's Pond, and Zone Coverage. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. And we're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Now, on today's show, we're going to talk about what the Vikings are going to do with Sam Darnold. We're going to talk about whether Kevin O'Connell has a right to be upset with his contract and a little bit about the NFL playoffs. But first, let me introduce my guest from the Purple Insider Substack and podcast. He is one of the biggest voices when it comes to Vikings coverage in the market. His name is Matthew Coller. Welcome back to the show, Matthew.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. I feel like every year, right at the end of the season, you have me on and we tear it all apart and break it all down together. So thanks for having me, man.
It's almost like therapeutic at this point. You know, you just pick up the season, you throw it against the ground, and you got pieces everywhere, and you try to reassemble them for next year. But before we do that, I got to start with a question because I watched the playoffs. I know you did too. You know, you're seeing Jaden Daniels, a rookie quarterback, hang 45 points against the Detroit Lions on Saturday night. And you're thinking to yourself, what the heck happened? Like, you're 14-2. You go into that week 18 game against the Lions. You got a chance at home field advantage. 2 weeks later, you're out of the playoffs. So I speak for many Vikings fans by leading off by asking, what the heck happened to this team the last 2 weeks?
Well, it certainly was a baffling collapse when you consider how they had looked against the Green Bay Packers. And I know that game ended up being close, but it really wasn't. I mean, they totally dominated that football game. Sam Darnold threw for 377 yards. The offensive line had a good game and protected him well, and they moved the football, and they baffled Jordan Love for the vast majority of that game and got after him and sacked him and stopped the run. And they did everything. And I don't know anybody who walked away from that game thinking, oh, yeah, the Vikings will be done in 2 weeks. I mean, I think we all felt like they would go to Detroit with a very good chance to beat the Lions at Ford Field and then have the number 1 seed and host a playoff game. And hey, who wants to come to US Bank Stadium? I think it was 8 of 10 home teams won. So the home field advantage still real in the playoffs. And if you look at the entire body of work of that season, why would anyone feel any differently after that Packers game than that? There was no evidence that they were just going to disappear. But I think when we look back and we pick it apart, there's a few things that we can find. One is that the offensive line really faded at the end of the season. They had a good game against the Packers, but if you look at PFF grade for pass blocking by individual game, it was really week 14 and on. The Packers game was the offensive line's only good pass blocking game. And they asked Sam Darnold to lead a game-winning drive against the Arizona Cardinals and to throw a 50-yard touchdown escaping from a bunch of Atlanta Falcons and throw a 40-yard touchdown escaping from a bunch of Seattle Seahawks. And we probably should have figured a little bit more that the pass protection was going to be an issue, and the fact that teams were figuring out some rush plans against them, particularly blitzing, and also it seemed that they figured out that they could attack Cam Robinson one-on-one if they had the right matchup. Zadarius Smith definitely turned out to be the right matchup. And that was what really dictated a lot of it, was in those 2 games that the defensive line and pass rush plans of the opposition just worked so well. And look, the Rams sacked Jalen Hurts, 5 or 6 times in that game. So they're as nasty as it comes. The Rams also held San Francisco to 6 points and the Jets to 6 points or whatever it was, 9 points. Like, they had really gotten hot as a defense toward the end of the year because their defensive line was so dominating. And I think it was the wrong matchups for the Vikings. And both games are a little different because in the Lions game, Sam Darnold missed passes. Guys were wide open in the end zone. Justin Jefferson dropped the touchdown. They missed the field goal. Everything seemed to go wrong. But against the Rams, there was really only one explanation, was they couldn't block anybody. And Sam Darnold, when things go wrong up front, he tries to escape. He tries to make plays. And every time he would try to escape or make a play, he would just run into somebody else that had won on their pass rush. And I think there was a lack of adjustment to that. The fact that they were losing pretty much every single pass drop back. And there also was not a counterpunch. And when you see what happened with the Eagles, and in order to have this counterpunch, you got to be really good at running. But Washington and Philly were both really good at running. And so Detroit's blitzing every other play, but it doesn't really matter because they had a quick passing game and they could run the ball, and Jaden Daniels could escape and make plays. And then the same thing for Philadelphia. As much as their passing game struggled because they were taking sacks all the time, Saquon Barkley goes for 200. Jalen Hurts runs for another 70. They win the football game. Those are things that the Vikings couldn't do. And I know they don't have a quarterback who can run for 70 yards in a game, but they just never had that running game to be a consistent churn of an offense. And I think that was costly because they just could never counter a lot of that pass rush. And I always think in the playoffs, what it comes down to is just how you match up, who you're facing. And they did not match up very well against that Rams D line with a struggling offensive line.
I feel like this is a good question to ask you because you wrote a book about this season, the 2017 Vikings. In that season, Case Keenum played well. The Vikings offensive line wasn't really an elite pass blocking unit, but Keenum moved around enough where it worked. Like he was able to escape the pressure. He was able to get out. Darnold did that for most of the year where it was like if Garrett Bradbury or Blake Brandel gets beat on something, he's able to scoot out of the pocket, buy some time, and fire some of those passes downfield. Do you feel like Darnold kind of had a same carriage turning into a pumpkin moment in the playoffs where he goes to Detroit, Detroit's able to expose them with the blitz, and then you just have a really sound defensive line with the Rams that got after it and kind of rattled his brain a little bit?
Yeah, I don't really like the turn into a pumpkin thing because, well, I mean, did Justin Herbert turn into a pumpkin? I mean, this happens in the playoffs sometimes, right? And I think the last thing we see is always the biggest thing we're going to react to. And I don't even want to look on the internet to see what they're saying about Lamar Jackson today. That's really how football analysis works most of the time. Whatever the thing we just saw is the complete truth about someone. But there is some differences and some not differences between the two. I mean, the not difference is that the Philadelphia Eagles 2017 defensive line got after Case Keenum because they were missing an offensive lineman and it threw him into disarray. And I think it was maybe Brandon Graham who got after him on an interception that turned the NFC Championship game toward the Philadelphia Eagles. And also there is limitations when you're not Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels to the scramble around thing. The quarterbacks who are in the championship weekend, they have something in common. They are all the 99th percentile athletes. Allen, Daniels, Hurts. I mean, these guys can do anything out there as far as scrambling, and Patrick Mahomes is the all-timer when it comes to a creation when there's pressure and moving around. I mean, those guys are on a different level than someone like Sam Darnold for doing that. I don't know if anyone in that Rams game could have done it because Hurts couldn't escape them. Patrick Mahomes in 2020 could not escape versus the Tampa Bay rush. But I think that what's not in common about those two is that Sam Darnold is so much more talented than Case Keenum. It's like not even in the same stratosphere of skill. And what we saw from Sam Darnold this year, I don't believe was a fluke. I mean, I think that his arm talent is not a fluke. His playmaking is not a fluke. His leadership, these are all things that he was supposed to have when he came out of college that he showed flashes throughout his career. There are stretches of Sam Darnold playing as a New York Jet at the same level he did in the regular season for the Vikings. There are stretches as a Carolina Panther where he did it with the infrastructure that they have. He was just able to do it more consistently with the Vikings. But everyone is going to have that Achilles heel. And the same thing happened to Herbert. Everyone is going to have that Achilles heel that if Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson are winning every single time and they're in the backfield every single time, even a great quarterback like Herbert is going to end up getting stressed by that quite a bit. So that's kind of how I look at that is, Keenum was truly the pop-up season, a magical miracle of a year where there was no way, if you simulated that season 10,000 times, that there would be another instance of going 13-3 with him playing as well as he did. I think with Darnold, the thought as we went along and after we got to Green Bay was, I guess it's just who he is. It's always who he was supposed to be. And then the last 2 weeks completely changed how everyone felt about Sam Darnold and who he is. And I don't think the truth is exactly in the middle. I think the truth leans much more toward he's actually a really good quarterback. But that's the whole decision thing is much more complicated than is he a really good quarterback. But I don't look at those 2 weeks and say, oh, it was all a fluke. It meant nothing. It was just this, lucky season or something for Darnold. I don't look at it like that, like I do with Case Keenum.
And I think the other point that some people have brought up is, there's been a lot of talk about infrastructure, right? It seems like, we go through shifts when we talk about building football teams. It starts with, okay, find a franchise quarterback. And now everybody's kind of like, well, the Texans selected David Carr, went first overall, and he had no offensive line or anything, and he got destroyed. Like, did Sam Darnold's infrastructure bring him down in the final 2 weeks? Because a lot of people look at Kevin O'Connell. It was one of the questions in his postseason presser last week, where why didn't you have a quick game in? And he's like, well, Sam didn't throw the ball. Like, how much should they get for this?
Yeah, I think when something like this happens, of course, everybody puts 100% of the blame on one person. But when you pick it apart, and this isn't just coming from me, also, if you look at Dan Orlovsky's breakdown of the game or Nate Tice, so some real, quarterback guys who know how to watch film at a high level, and then reviewing what they said myself on the film, you see very few opportunities that Kevin O'Connell was talking about for Sam Darnold to actually get the ball out. And there's one example that really frustrated me, which was the 4th and 2 play where he took a sack. The play is designed to go to Justin Jefferson on a quick out, and Jefferson would have been open, but he trips. He trips on the cornerback's feet. And when you freeze the tape at the moment he starts to trip, you look for other options for Sam Darnold, every receiver is at least 15 yards down the field on 4th and 2. And you go, what exactly is Sam Darnold supposed to do on that one? Right? There are other times where there are people open, or there's Jalen Naylor screaming across the middle, he's wide open, or there is a cornerback blitz that they don't identify and you can't take the sack. And you can't have it be a strip sack and return for a touchdown. And there's a lot of it. It really was everybody. It's Cam Robinson, who was so good when he got here, giving up 12 pressures in that game, and every single drop back, it seemed he was right back in Sam Darnold's lap. When your left tackle is getting pushed back into you, I mean, it's hard to manage that as a quarterback. So I thought that they lacked options for him on a lot of those plays. When there were options there, he didn't find them or wasn't able to get the ball out. And you really can't run backward when you're getting pressured. You can't lose 15 yards when you get sacked, because that's a drive ruiner. And that's Sam Darnold did that when he had his bad days. Against the Jets, he did the same thing. He would start to go backward. The interception that he threw was an example. He had made that same throw on an out route to Jordan Addison probably 20 times this year, and he hesitated ever so slightly, just didn't trust his feet and eyes that he talked about so many times, and it gets undercut by a corner because he didn't throw with anticipation and on time, because he was completely thrown off by the speed and the pressure that was being put on him. So it really was everything. But I thought, as I was watching Washington get the ball out quickly, and I think they had 10 passes that were behind the line of scrimmage in that game against Detroit for something like 120 yards. They had the long one to Terry McLaurin, but they were doing a lot of quick stuff. The Vikings have not had a screen game since Gary Kubiak was here, and they haven't had a run game really since Gary Kubiak was here. And when you don't have those things to help you out when you're getting crushed, and then all of your route concepts, and O'Connell, I mean, there's no question he knows a heck of a lot more about this offense than I do, but I just want him to use his finger to point to me where Darnold was supposed to throw the ball on quick game on a lot of these plays, because I just couldn't find it. Like, where was this supposed to go? And I think when you live by a deep passing game, and that is your whole offense, which it was for most of their season, that if you get got by a defensive line on a deep passing game, you're going to get eliminated. And this happens throughout history. I mean, the first name that came to mind to me was Andrew Luck in the playoffs, that it would happen to him. They had a deep passing game in Indianapolis. They didn't quite have the horses up front to block it up, and he would get hit and sacked and struggle, and they would get eliminated. And then everyone would go, is Andrew Luck actually any good? And we just do it 1,000 times over. So it's one of those things that, O'Connell said he's going to be thinking about all offseason. I'm certainly thinking about it all offseason. I've watched the game back several times just looking for answers, and there is none. And the Rams almost went to Philly, by the way, and sacked the heck out of Jalen Hurts, and were one drive away, one completion away maybe from upsetting yards. From upsetting that team. And so I think this is just how football goes. When a team beats another team and we're covering the team that lost, we just go, they did everything wrong. They stink. Everyone deserves to be fired. The quarterback's horrible, and you all should be ashamed. And we give zero credit to the other team. The other team is coached by Sean McVay. They have a Super Bowl quarterback. They have freaks on the defensive line. They have developed some players in the secondary. They're a great football team that won their division and then went to Philly and almost beat them, maybe one fumble or one drive away. I think we also have to say maybe the Rams were just really good also.
It is funny you mentioned that, because I woke up this morning, poured myself a cup of coffee, and walked through Detroit Lions Reddit this morning. And a lot of people were saying, Jared Goff is horrible. We need to get rid of him. Like with Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, don't let the door hit you on. It's like, whoa. Weren't you just chanting Jared Goff's name for the past 4 months? Like what's going on here, guys? This is kind of weird. Outside of quick game and what happened against the Rams and all that stuff, Kevin O'Connell has something else to think about, and that is a new contract. O'Connell is entering the final year of a 4-year contract next season. The Wilfs came out and said they were going to evaluate him in year 3, and Kevin O'Connell went out and went 14-3 with Sam Darnold, and now he's in a position to get paid. Seems pretty obvious, but then the TikTok crew showed up. Jay Glazer said teams want to play for Kevin O'Connell. Mike Florio says there's tension and he wants control on the roster. What is going on with Kevin O'Connell right now? Because this seems like it should be a pretty easy negotiation. Like, what do you want? Okay, cool. Like, what's going on right now?
The TikTok crew is pretty funny.
And they have their app back. They're celebrating this morning.
Yes, they do. Yeah, yes, they do. Yeah, that's the whole NFL insider world is always very bizarre to me, and I've always struggled with it, because I just want to ask, is Justin Jefferson getting traded or not? Because there was no logic whatsoever, and I'll tie these two things together. There was no logic whatsoever to suggest that the Vikings would trade Justin Jefferson, the best wide receiver in the world, who clearly wanted to remain as a Minnesota Viking, and there was no indications from anyone. And yet there were always people saying, but they could, but they might. And I guess NFL insider reporting has been reduced to stuff could happen. I mean, I didn't know that this was a good way to get ahead in the industry. Otherwise, I would have tried it much earlier. They could trade Kevin O'Connell to the Cowboys. Like, I mean, lots of stuff could happen. Is there credible evidence that it will? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And there was no credible evidence that they could trade Justin Jefferson. And there's no credible evidence that anything other than a normal contract extension will happen for Kevin O'Connell. And it does seem that there are certain people that have maybe an agenda or reason to try to use situations like this to stir the pot and to get people talking. And then there's this effect that happens is when somebody with any sort of platform says, hey, something could happen, then enough people think that it really has an actual chance to happen, like greater than 50%, that it becomes a talking point to the point where we're asking him about it in press conferences. And you go, wait a minute, Where is show me real legitimate evidence that something could happen other than this super speculative, I don't even want to call it a report, just stuff said on television or whatever it behind it. And there's this little trick in media too, that if you act like something really salacious is going on, but you don't say what it is, people love it. People absolutely love it. If I came on and said, Chris, there's something going on here. Yeah. Something going on with O'Connell. I don't know what it is, but it's something. People would go crazy. And they'd be like, oh man, he said something's going on there. I bet something's going on there. And it's like, first of all, we need to stop falling for it. I think that the audience, the Vikings fans, they need to stop falling for it. So what I'll say about O'Connell's contract is I have zero reason to believe that anything other than a regular contract extension will happen for him. I have a question though. And I'm not saying something's going on here. My question is how the distribution of power will potentially change, because I don't know what it is now as far as who has control of the roster and who's making the decisions and who's calling the shots in the draft and things like that. But after this much credibility built up and this much success by Kevin O'Connell, I do wonder, it's probably not money that you're pushing the envelope on, because there are precedents and numbers for coaches who have won a lot, and it could be years, could be part of it. You know, do you want 4 or 5 or whatever? But I think more than anything, if you're wielding your, hey, I won 14 games last year stick, you're probably saying, I am the captain now, right? When it comes to the roster. Again, I don't know that that's the case. I just know that's how these negotiations go. And if I was in Kevin O'Connell's shoes, when they first got there, it was like, well, I'm kind of lucky to have a head coaching job here because of my lack of experience as an offensive coordinator. I think he had 2 years as an OC. And if, your Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was the one who hired him, so was he more powerful as far as the roster goes, or had more of the Wilf's ear in terms of shaping the path? And could that potentially change? These are things that they're going to have to work through as who has the final say on a lot of things. And I think O'Connell, if I'm him, I want to have that final say because I've proven myself. But aside from that, if I'm the Wilfs, what do I want here? Just won 14 games. We drafted the quarterback. We've got all sorts of star talent. They've just got Grenard in his prime. Jefferson, Addison emerged again this year. I thought had a very good season. You got 2 offensive tackles. There's a lot to work with here to compete in the NFC North. I don't want anything other than this direction to keep happening with these 2 working together in collaboration to build this roster. And I think ultimately that's what ends up happening. Just the thing that we would all expect after a season like this.
And I think too, I don't think Kevin O'Connell wants to be Bill Parcells, where he has every waking decision. Like if there's something Vikings related, it has to go through him. I'm sure there are some things he wants to do, like, hey, can I bench Ed Ingram because he's not very good and my quarterback's getting killed? Like that would be a decision he would probably want to make. But I think too, he could be, you could see the frustration. Mike McDaniel did far less in Miami, and he got a 3-year contract extension at the beginning of the season. And when you look back, I'm actually writing an article for Zone Coverage today on this. When you look back at that 2021 season with Mike Zimmer and the final 2 weeks and how toxic that place was, Mike Zimmer's up there, trashing Justin Jefferson because he wants to break a franchise record in a meaningless game. And they hire O'Connell and they hire Adolfo-Mensah. That first year, O'Connell takes Mike Zimmer's team, leads them to 13 wins. The next year, they start 1-4, and it was O'Connell's culture that kept everybody motivated, everybody locked in. Even after Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles, they go 7-10. I think at that point, O'Connell's probably sitting there being like, I did what I was supposed to do. Now I just took my franchise quarterback, JJ McCarthy, in the draft, who's going to be my guy. Why haven't I gotten paid yet? And I don't think it's to the point where, he's pounding on the Wilf's desk like, trade me right now. I think it's something that will have to get smoothed over before they wind up coming up with a contract.
Well, this also, it feels like the effect is working when we talk about this. I mean, with O'Connell, if we're looking for, well, could he be mad? Let's go find some reasons. That would be like if, well, I guess she wouldn't struggle. I was going to say, if you asked my wife, hey, what does your husband do that's annoying or something? And then she starts thinking of every annoying thing that I do. And then you're like, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe you do hate him. But not that I would never be annoying to my wife, but
Never.
The same thing sort of applies here, though, where we've invented that O'Connell's mad at them. Right? I mean, it's not like they went. It's not like they did what the Cowboys did with Mike McCarthy, where they took it into the final year of the contract. This was not the final year of the contract. It was, and Mike McDaniel had an amazing year with the Miami Dolphins, where 7-10. Look, we know that the Wilfs, they want playoff games, they want wins, they want competitive seasons, and the Vikings, we can say, well, Kirk got hurt and everything. They also lost a bunch of close games with Dobbs and with Mullins, and no one holds that against O'Connell. I certainly don't. But I think from their perspective, it was, all right, you guys are selling us on a very new direction. Why don't we see what that looks like? And then we'll talk about the contract extension with a full year left on the deal. And I think that that's fine. I mean, think about, like, if this year, think their Vegas over under was 6.5. I mean, if you're the owner of the team and Vegas is saying you might win 6 games, then I think what you want is to see how this turns out. I wrote an article about it right before the season where I was like, this is a great number for them, because if they can't beat this number, then they've got major problems. And if they beat this number, then we all go forward and say, like, we're good. And they destroyed that number, of course, with the way that all the free agents worked out and how well O'Connell coached the team and everything else. And even just identifying Darnold as a bridge quarterback, I mean, he was not a lot of people's first choice when it came to a bridge quarterback for this year. And yet, he identified him. All those things, they're all great for O'Connell. But I think from ownership's perspective, if the world is telling you from the outside, yeah, your team's going to be horrible, and then you probably want to decide, okay, if our team is horrible, like everyone is saying when they're picking us last in the division, or the gamblers are saying that we're going to be the worst, I want to see how it feels then to decide what we're going to do with the coach. And also, you need to know, are we making a long commitment? Is it a 5-year commitment, or is it a 2-year commitment? Because after 2020, I think they had to sign Zimmer again. Yeah, I think it was after 2020.
Yep.
And that had been such a miserable year. And I remember the negotiations went all the way up to almost training camp. And Zimmer was mad, and he was putting it out there that he was unhappy and everything. But I mean, from the Wilfs' perspective, they could only sign him to another 2-year. I think it was a 2-year deal. Maybe it was a 3. I think it was a 3-year deal. It had to be short because it was a wreck, and you need to prove that you could turn it around. So I think with O'Connell, what they wanted to do, and this is not from anything that Mark Wilf said, but just kind of putting the pieces together, why don't we see how this plays out, how we feel about the overall direction of our franchise with you as our leaders, and then we can decide how long we want to sign up for this. After this season, I think everyone would agree this is a great leadership and direction to sign up for, and they should be looking at 5 or 6 years for Kevin O'Connell for an extension. But we didn't know that before the season. I had them as a 9-win wildcard team, and I'm sure that a lot of people had them as being behind the Bears. Like, we don't know these things. So I always understood the logic there. And I think that just when someone whispers to you, like, if they whisper to you, like, he might be mad, and you're like, oh, I'll look for reasons that he'll be mad. That's kind of how I feel this thing is played out. Now, if something shows itself and that turns out to be right, then I'll change my opinion. But as of right now, if someone has to bring to me any evidence that there is a problem here between O'Connell and the Wilfs with this contract.
So I think there's 100% chance this gets done this offseason, but I guess the last question for me is, how quickly do you think this contract will get done? Because they have to go into free agency. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah is also eligible for a contract extension. It would be nice to go to these free agents and be like, hey, here's a what's his name for Kansas City? I'm blanking right now.
Trey
The
Smith.
guard, Trey Smith. Yeah, going up to him and being like, here's a 5-year deal. We're going to be here the entire time. It's going to be great. Sign on the dotted line. We'll give you a bunch of money. Like, how quickly do you think this contract gets done? Is it something we might see at the combine, or is it something that we'll see, right before training camp or something?
I think it was 2019 that they signed an extension, or maybe after the 2018 season, Spielman and Zimmer, that they announced it at the combine that they had signed an extension. But I don't really know when we're going to find out. Well, I mean, if is likely, but when, I don't really know. Because this could play out through the summer. I mean, certainly you want to have it done before, I think before even OTAs and minicamp. I think that you want to get this done within the next few weeks and then go to the combine with everyone secure in their positions and only focused on that, and not have that question circling. And then the same with the owners meetings, definitely before the owners meetings, because I'm sure I'll be down there. What do you think we're going to ask if they don't have a contract extension? That's going to be the number one question for the owners, is what the heck is going on, if that is not done yet. I think that over the next few weeks, it should be worked out. But I also think that on O'Connell's side, he has an agent whose job is to get him every last dollar, and you're asking for the moon at this point. And if you're on the Wilf side, you don't want to have much pushback here because of the success that you've had with O'Connell in charge. But you also want to say, we did get killed in that playoff game. And we did get killed in that game that we were supposed to win in Detroit. And we did check down on 4th and 8 and lose to the Giants at home. And so if you want Andy Reid money, that might be a little bit much, because there's other guys in this league who have taken their teams to Super Bowls. But that's the only thing they could really go for in the negotiation. I mean, these are the guys you want running your team. And the Wilfs have never been known at all to be cheap. I mean, they have spent and spent and spent on this roster, and we'll see on the coaching staff, but also Zimmer is off the books. So they've got that they're not paying 2 coaches anymore. But even when they fired Zimmer, they were paying 2 coaches. So it's not like with every discussion we have to go back to, I don't know, they're kind of penny pinchers. They have always put down the money required to sign whatever player they needed, or to, keep whatever coach they needed. So I suspect with it in the next couple of weeks that it will happen. If we get to training camp and it doesn't, then we've got ourselves a story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think O'Connell and Adolfo Mensa will be paid at some point. And I think by the time we hit that first practice I was going to say Mankato, man, I'm old. In Egan, we will have some news on Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo Mensa. Also, our listeners can get paid as well at Underdog Fantasy, because it is the best place to cash in on all of your takes during the playoffs. With over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all of your favorite athletes' performances. With their pick'em game, you can win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on your favorite players' stats, like yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. They've got all of your favorite teams, leagues, and stars to choose from, and Underdog is the only pick'em platform that puts the power to cash out in your hands. They also have rescues, which means that if a player gets hurt early in a game, you can get your money back, and you receive a promo if your early injury causes you to lose. I've been using Underdog for a few years, and we're coming down the home stretch of the season with the conference championship games next weekend. The college football championship game is tonight. Going higher on Anthony Edwards points has been a great decision lately, and there's plenty of other NBA and NHL action you can get your hands on a nightly basis. It's why Underdog is the best place to play pick'em. Download the app, sign up with the promo code The Age, which is all one word. Deposit now to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's promo code The Age, which is all one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. You must be 18 years or older, 19 years or older in Alabama or Nebraska, 19 years or older in Colorado for some games, 21 years or older in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado for some games. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY, which is 467-369. All right. So we got last 2 weeks out of the way. We got Kevin O'Connell out of the way. Here's what Vikings fans really want to know, because they were 13-2, and people are like, well, who's going to play quarterback next year? Like they weren't even able to enjoy the season because they didn't know what was going to happen next year. So we talked a little bit about Sam Darnold at the top of the show. What kind of market do you think Sam Darnold will have as he approaches free agency?
Yeah, I think that there should be quite a few teams that are interested in hoping that the Vikings let Sam Darnold go, because as much as the last 2 weeks have shaped the narrative on him to maybe the whole pumpkin thing or, whatever, let's just talk about what the Las Vegas Raiders have had at quarterback since, I don't know, Rich Gannon. They have 0 playoff wins since Rich Gannon, and they have 0 answers at quarterback. If they don't end up somehow landing Shadur Sanders in the draft, then who's playing quarterback for them? Look around at the free agents. Let's see. I think Daniel Jones is probably the 3rd best free agent quarterback. Russell Wilson, who got a team to the playoffs but didn't really play all that well, is the 2nd best. Mac Jones is the 4th best. I mean, Sam Darnold last year put up the type of performance and is still in his prime that would suggest that your team can get to the playoffs with him at quarterback, as long as you have, as we talked about, a good infrastructure. And I think if you're the Raiders, the Rams might also be without a quarterback if Matthew Stafford decides to hang it up after this year. I think there's a decent chance that that will happen. And then, I don't know, 5 or 6 other teams. I mean, the Cleveland Browns have no answer at quarterback, and they've got a good line and a running game, and they can run some play actions and stuff with him and so forth. I mean, there's quite a few teams out there that I think are hoping that the Vikings just let him walk away, and so they could try to sign him to a Baker Mayfield type of contract, because they are in absolute screwed land when it comes to the quarterback situation. And if the Vikings franchise tag him to trade him, if that's what they want to do, then things become a little more complicated, because then the other team has to probably trade for him and extend him. And then what are you giving up? Are the Raiders willing to give up a 2nd round pick for Sam Darnold, which is what I would be searching for if I'm the Vikings, at least a 2nd round pick, probably a little more than that, because the compensation pick would be in the 3rd round. So I need better than that, or we could just let him go and get our comp pick down the road. And if you're the Vikings, you're also thinking, we have no draft picks for this year. We've got a 1st rounder, a 3rd rounder, and a 5th rounder, I think. And that's it. So can we get a couple of more? I think if you're the Vikings, you're looking to do that. So I'm sure on the day, if they franchise tag him, which I don't see why you wouldn't try to tag and trade, because you have to know that there's going to be suitors out there, but they can be sure at the combine. I believe the date to franchise tag him is March 4th. And right before that is the NFL combine. What a coincidence. And so they'll have plenty of opportunity to bump into people and have conversations if that's the route that they're going. I believe I am the only person in America who has talked about the possibility that this does not happen and Sam Darnold is still playing quarterback for the Vikings. And I feel like every time I talk about that possibility, I need to issue an apology or some sort of call 1-800-Darnold if you're mad at Matthew for talking about this possibility. And the way that I looked at it, though, is number one, we always overreact to the playoffs. They have to consider the bigger picture. But really what is being ignored in the discussion where everyone has decided that this is over, McCarthy's the quarterback, is McCarthy's recovery and where he stands in that. Because when you start to think about a guy who has gone through this and missed an entire year, and I know he's got mental reps, but he had to really rebuild his throwing when he got to the Vikings. When we first saw him at rookie minicamp, he's flying passes all over the place. And then by training camp, he had really gotten down the footwork and everything else. He worked super hard, was really, really impressive to the point where he was executing the offense and throwing accurately all the time. But that took 6 months to figure out, or how many, or 4 months from the time of when he first got here to the time where he got injured. It took a long time. And even in the preseason game, he threw an interception. It wasn't flawless. There's still things that he was having to work out. So now he's got to do this whole process again. And also, clearly, as everyone saw on TV, and we've seen him around the building, he's going to have to put on a lot of weight. He's going to have to rebuild his entire body because he wasn't able to work out in the same way with this injury. And it might just be a lot to ask. And the only people who really know where he stands are Kevin O'Connell and probably their trainer, Tyler Williams. And if Kevin O'Connell said to me, I want to give him more time, I don't want to throw him to the Wolves next year. I want to give him more time. So I want to franchise tag Darnold and run it back and see if we can recreate last season with a lot of the same players, compete for the NFC North, take another shot with Darnold, and then turn it over to JJ when he's 100% ready. Then I don't know who would tell O'Connell to shut up at that point, right? He'd be like, "You quiet, you." I think that the best thing for JJ McCarthy is what they should do. And if they believe, yeah, he'll put the weight back on quick and everything will be fine and mentally he's ready to go and we loved where he was at and it's McCarthy time, then I would say, oh, okay, good. But I think that there's just been a lot of other factors. And the other thing is too, just to complete the whole circle here, is if you're Kevin O'Connell, the record that they put on your Pro Football Reference page that says Kevin O'Connell coach win-loss, it does not have an asterisk that says he was developing a quarterback that year. If they go from 14 wins to 8 in a tough division with a tougher schedule because they're developing a quarterback, then Kevin O'Connell doesn't get to be like, hey, come on, everybody. It was a young quarterback, right? And he knows that. So how comfortable is he just throwing out someone who, again, I'd like to remind everyone, JJ McCarthy's never played football in the NFL. We've already decided, a lot of people have already decided exactly what he is. They've envisioned it. They've looked to the skies and they've seen McCarthy throw and touchdown. He's never actually done these things. And he's only thrown 714 passes since he graduated high school in actual football games. Do you know how many Jaden Daniels has now at this point? Like 2,000. So all these things are reasons to wonder, would they tag him and try to do it for one more year? And I'll just throw this out there because there have been people who on the internet, as they always do, try to misconstrue what I'm saying to be like, he's the Darnold guy, he's the JJ hater. And you're like, oh, I never went through this with Kirk. This is a very new game you guys have come up with. Congratulations. You're really good. But just to be clear, I mean, I would prefer it for Sam Darnold that he go play somewhere else because I don't think it's going to be easy to recreate 14 wins. And I also just wouldn't want it for him with the fans. I would not want it for him with the fans. You go 0-1 and it's going to be put in JJ. It was a mistake to bring him back, get rid of him. He was not embraced. He was not embraced at any point because he's not the prince that was promised like JJ McCarthy and the cap space that was promised like McCarthy brings. And you get halfway through the season and you're 5-4 and everybody's saying, bench him, get rid of him, all that sort of stuff. It's a better situation if they can move on. There's no question about it. If they can move on and McCarthy is as good as what Darnold was for them this year, and they can do that on the rookie contract, that's a better scenario. I'm only laying it out there that it isn't as open and shut or simple as a lot of people have made it seem. That's the whole point.
And that reminds me, I should apologize to you because late on that Monday night, you said there's no silver linings on this. And I tweeted, yes, there is. Sam Darnold's gone. And my back. Sometimes I need somebody to come into my house and be like, get off the Twitter machine. Woo. Like, no. So I'm foaming out of the mouth, getting dragged out of my apartment. But, I think the one key difference here is that like the franchise tag is in play. Like last year, going back to Kirk Cousins, like you could not keep Kirk Cousins because it was going to cost you a long-term deal. It was going to cost you $45 million. He's 36, coming off the torn Achilles. There were a lot of reasons why this was a bad idea. With Darnold, you can at least paint out a positive picture like you just did by giving him that franchise tag. And for Darnold too, it's even a better deal because I think Tom Pelissero mentioned this. If you tag Darnold, like you tag him once, it's 40 million. You tag him a second time, it's 48 million. The first 2 years of any contract need to have $88 million up front. And that helps Darnold in that regard. So, I mean, you mentioned this too. Nobody knows as much about this situation as Kevin O'Connell does because you can have a quarterback that, if JJ McCarthy's like, Goodwill Hunting on the whiteboard right now, and he can draw, plays on top of plays and all that stuff. That's great. Christian Ponder could do that too. The problem with Christian Ponder is you put him on an NFL field and he didn't look at all like an NFL quarterback. You don't want that to happen to JJ McCarthy. So when it comes to all of that, those are factors you have to consider when making this type of deal. And it brings me to my next point because I wanted to bring this up to you because you look at Sam Darnold and you say, okay, you can trade him for draft picks, but like, what are you getting? Like every conversation around this topic has like cliche. They should be trademarked at this point. Like there's the Baker Mayfield contract and the Jordan Love plan. And there's find your Mahomes. Like every NFL GM should have like, like the live, laugh, love sign. Like they should just say, find your Mahomes and just put it in their office and, everything in there. I want to talk about two potential deals. Because I'm not sure if this compares to Darnold, but I feel like it can help us decide, hey, like, would it be beneficial? Because there was the Matt Castle deal. 2008, Tom Brady tears his ACL. They're not moving on from him when he comes back in 2009. Castle throws for 3,693 yards, 21 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. The Patriots trade Matt Castle and Mike Vrabel to the Chiefs for the 34th overall pick. They get Patrick Chung, who is a very solid player for them during their second run of Super Bowl titles. And the Chiefs get Matt Castle, which didn't turn out so great, but we don't need to worry about that. Alex Smith deal. Smith throws for 4,042 yards, 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions in 2017. Patrick Mahomes is there. We know what happened after that, but Kansas City gets a 3rd round pick, which turns out to be Dorian O'Daniel, who I know, and Kendall Fuller, who decent cornerback. So like, are these baselines, like if the Vikings do decide to shop Darnold, are they pulling these up and going, hey, this is kind of what we need in return, or how do they figure this out?
Sorry, I'm laughing at, and I appreciate the audience participation, but as you said, like the live, laugh, love thing, it's also the, did you know you get extra cap space for Kevin McCarthy? It's like, yeah, yep. Oh, yeah, the interior. Oh, please tell me more about how they need interior O-line. I've only heard this every year since I've been here. I'd also like to point out, by the way, this is just a total aside, and then I'll get to what you're saying, the Philadelphia Eagles are the best line in the world, and they still needed a plan for a defensive line that beat them. I'm just saying. That the way defenses are now, you have to have counters for that because we need a better alignment. Like, yeah, you do. But anyway, so I like both of those deals for them if they're moving Darnold. And this happens every single time I just bring up factors, like every single time, like, well, how they feel about McCarthy's recovery could be a factor. And, O'Connell wanting to follow up on 14 wins with a quarterback he trained all year could be a factor. And it's just like, stop talking or I'm going to hurt you is basically the only response. So again, like nobody, I wanted to work out for Darnold to be able to go somewhere where he doesn't have the fans that want cap space more than him playing quarterback. So Anyway, I think those deals are very reasonable comparisons, even though you have to go back a little ways in history because it doesn't happen. And when there's just enough teams out there who need someone to turn it around. I mean, think about even the New York Giants. If they don't get Shadur Sanders or whatever quarterback, they are on the hot seat in New York. And even then, even if you drafted Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, if you're drafting someone to save your bacon in your first year, is that a good strategy? Like, didn't we see Matt Eberflus and Matt Nagy both fail in those same circumstances? You got to be thinking, if you're the New York Giants or the Raiders, but let's even just focus on the Giants here. You just got Malik Neighbors. Sam Darnold threw the ball all season long to Justin Jefferson. He finished second in receiving yards. I mean, are you not sending a second round pick for someone like Sam Darnold, even for a year as a bridge quarterback, to just save your job and to prove to the ownership that you can win? Because every single time Saquon Barkley gains a first down, the whole internet tweets out how you let him go, which, by the way, was like earmuffs to Giants fans. It was the right idea. It was like they weren't winning the Super Bowl with Saquon Barkley. It was better for them to let him go. So owning them over and over for letting them go is kind of silly, in my opinion. But anyway, if you're them, though, you got this megastar wide receiver. You need somebody to throw him the ball today. And is that worth sending a draft pick? If you can't draft Shadur Sanders, then you have no answer at quarterback. There's at least 4 or 5 teams that are in this position where the coach has got to be feeling it. I mentioned Cleveland. Kevin Stefanski, there's no way he survives another season. Like, there's no way he survives missing the playoffs for another year. And with Las Vegas, they're going to hire Ben Johnson or somebody out there. Not if you ask Tom Brady on the broadcast, then it's just words. But they're probably hiring Ben Johnson, right? But his first question is, who's my quarterback? And if his quarterback is Sam Darnold, you might be pretty good running that same offense that Jared Goff was. So I think that there's a lot of teams that have a lot of incentive because of pressure on jobs and things like that to want to trade for Darnold. So the day, if this happens, we franchise tag Sam Darnold and the internet completely melts down, it's like, well, that might be to trade him. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But it has become almost like a comedy bit where it's just like, who's on first base is sort of like well, this is a little more complicated. And it's just like, no, okay. Yeah, but what if McCarthy's not ready? I don't care is basically the answer. I think some of this is very logical. And some of this is just like people being really mad at Sam Darnold for not playing well in the last 2 games. And I'm not sure they want to acknowledge that, but still the most likely outcome is that JJ McCarthy plays next year.
I'm looking at the list of free agents right now as we speak. And yes, there is Sam Darnold. We mentioned Daniel Jones could also be out there, but then it's Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock. Marcus Mariota had a key point in that Washington game on Saturday night, but it wasn't a great one. Andy Dalton, Justin Fields. I'm thinking Sam Darnold might look like the belle of the ball when it comes to some of these teams. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason. It's going to be crazy, but people can follow along at Purple Insider. And I got to ask you before we let you go, what's going on with the podcast and the Substack, man?
Yeah, well, I just launched my Future of the Vikings series. So every day over the next 2 weeks, I will have a breakdown of how every single player performed, all their statistics, the PFF numbers, the factors, the cap hits. People love those. So we'll look at every single position, every single player, and what the front office is going to have to consider with that. So I just put out there the quarterback analysis, in which I tried actually because everyone brings up the cap space thing. So what I attempted to do was kind of simulate the offseason, and with Darnold at quarterback, which I know, I'm sorry, your audience just tried to light their computers on fire, but I apologize. This is what I do. So I attempted to figure out, could they do everything they need to do around the franchise tag based on how other contracts around the league have been structured? And the answer I came up with is kind of. like close-ish, not completely. They can't bring back every single player that they have as a free agent and sign every single huge star. But could they restructure enough deals to create more cap space to be able to fit other players in at key positions? Yes, they could. Could they take an approach where it's not Trey Smith, but it's actually somebody who's more like $8 million and good than the gold standard, which I'm not convinced Trey Smith is leaving Kansas City, by the way. That's another, I'm sorry, I don't mean to like rant, but when we do like the free agent lists while the season is still going on, half of them are gone by the time we get to free agency because they sign extensions with their teams, but that's not the point. So what I found was for 1 year, if they structured deals correctly, they could work around the franchise tag if they needed to rebuild a lot of the key parts of this roster. Will they do that? I don't know. But if they franchise tag him and Darnold is your quarterback for next year, it does not mean that the world has ended. They can't use any caps. Like in 2018 and 2019, they worked around Kirk Cousins' deal to keep everybody. It was only after that they started to fall apart. So, I mean, nobody wants to hear it. I get it. JJ's great. He's the best. He's Super Bowl 2025. Cap spaces win Super Bowls. I don't know. At this point, I've just run out of things to say because like the minute I start talking about this, I just feel the anger. So I just, like, sorry, but I also wrote about McCarthy in this article. So you should go click it.
And you know what? I'll mention this too. It's on both sides of the argument. Like there's this Sam, and I mean, you're not on here being like they have to sign Sam Darnold or the franchise will grow. You're saying, hey, it could be and I mean, I acknowledged that last week too. I'm like, do I want Sam Darnold to come back? Not really. But I mean, if the Vikings decide to do it, I'm not going to be mad at Kevin O'Connell. Like, what are you doing? He knows more than we do. And there's a way to make it happen that you can still be competitive. A lot of the money, like the Vikings had a ton of dead cap this year. I can't remember the exact number, but like Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Aaron Jones, all that money was pushed into next year. You don't want to do that, but this team, I think, has like $107 million worth of cap space 2 years down the road. If you have to push some of that money so you give JJ McCarthy a chance to get on the field and get some reps, it's not a doomsday scenario. So I don't know. I mean, I mentioned it last. I'm like, I think JJ McCarthy's going to pan out. Like, no, the draft analyst you promoted was wrong, and no draft analyst is wrong. And I'm going on my own rant.
No, because this whole thing that we've created in this world, and I know that you and I both benefit from it, from having our shows and stuff, but it is exhausting. It is exhausting because when you try to go through the nuances of something, it just doesn't really matter. And that's the media world that has been created by the shouty TV shows and all of that, where it's like you dig your heels into an opinion and you will hear nothing else and you shout louder. But the thing about my job is it's to look at the whole picture. And when I look at the whole picture, and if I were doing the thing where I put like a list on a whiteboard of all the reasons to keep Darnold and reasons to not keep Darnold, it's a little more compelling than everybody acts like. But that's not shouting louder. So it really doesn't do me a whole lot of good to lay it out, because when I go for the, like, is there an actual case to bring back Darnold? Like, okay, the fact that you just won 14 games and he was the 8th best quarterback in the league by PFF has to be a factor that he played awesome. So that's one for the most part for the whole season. And it has to be a factor that when we talk about like Kevin O'Connell and the roster, and it's a veteran group and it's a team that wants to go back and win, that there is a lot of risk involved at handing the keys to that over to someone who's never played before, and not only has never played, but didn't even play a lot in college. And so there's also that. And the fact that, as you said, when you look at the salary cap, how it actually works, how they actually structure contracts, how they can work around 70 million in dead cap, it doesn't mean that they suddenly can't sign any offensive linemen. It just means that they have to structure it in a different way. And when you consider that we don't know exactly where JJ McCarthy and his knees stand, all of that adds up to, hey, that might be a thing. I don't think it is. I think that they'll still just go the route we always expected. But I feel like I have to say all those things, right? Or I'm just not giving the entire picture.
And I just want to point out Mark Boxwell. He does appreciate your analysis going both hands. I love Matthew's analysis because he's not from Minnesota and he's not jaded by the purple. He comes from another team to cover the Vikings. He gives hard hitting assessment, like 90s football. Like no flags here for Matthew. You're not going to breathe on the quarterback, and 4 flags are going to throw out. This is Matthew Coller, straight 90s hard hitting analysis. And that's why we love you on the Viking Age podcast. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all those cool YouTube and Spotify and Apple things so you never miss a new episode and we could spread the word to the masses. I'm Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. He is Matthew Coller at Matthew Coller. This has been the Viking Age podcast.